Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a really fascinating alternative clinical analysis from German New Medicine. We're going to impartially unpack a concept known as the Nympho Constellation. It's basically a framework that looks at how our brains might actually be hardwired to respond to catastrophic loss, all through the lens of evolutionary biology. Let's kick things off with a question that flips traditional psychiatric models completely upside down. Think about it. When someone suddenly exhibits severe behavioral changes, specifically intense, hyper-sexualized mating behaviors, is that just a sign of a broken mind? Or, as this specific model suggests, could it actually be a highly calculated, deeply ingrained evolutionary survival tactic? It is a pretty provocative question, and to answer it using this framework, we have to look closely at exactly how the brain processes compound trauma.
To understand this biological journey, we're going to follow a clear path. We'll start by rethinking behavioral pathology, then look at the two biological conflicts, see how the brain gets trapped, explore manic versus depressive dominance, uncover the biological switches, and finally, look at how to resolve the nest crisis.
All right, let's jump right into Section 1, Rethinking Behavioral Pathology. This requires a pretty massive paradigm shift. The absolute core of this source material is the idea that these intense behavioral shifts aren't failings at all. Instead, they are biological special programs triggered for one reason: survival. This framework completely rejects the idea of a broken mind. It argues that what we typically diagnose as erratic or pathological behavior is literally the brain executing a precisely calibrated emergency protocol. It's like nature's ultimate backup plan kicking in when the survival of a lineage is on the line.
So, what exactly triggers this intense survival program in the first place? Let's move on to Section 2, the two biological conflicts. According to this clinical analysis, the trigger is something called the nest crisis. Think of it as a catastrophic double impact to someone's world. A single trauma is one thing, right? But this specific constellation requires two simultaneous threats to survival. It's an existential biological emergency, where the brain basically decides that the lineage itself is at immediate critical risk. And this perfectly captures that crisis. On one side, you have a sexual or mating conflict. This involves intense distress over reproductive viability or maybe sexual rejection. Biologically, this maps to the left side of the brain, linking to physical relays like the cervix uteri or coronary veins. Then, on the other side, you have a territorial loss or emotional separation, like the unexpected loss of a mate. This links to the right brain and the coronary arteries relay. When these two massive, specific shocks overlap, boom, you get the nest crisis. The territory is lost and the ability to reproduce is threatened all at once.
Let's shift gears to Section 3, Trapping the Brain, and look at the mechanical response to these simultaneous shocks.
This blueprint suggests that the brain actually gets trapped in a suspended loop between the left insula and the right temporal lobe. Because those two distinct conflicts hit opposite hemispheres, a dual-hemisphere constellation is activated. Now, why on earth would the brain do this? Well, the model posits a really fascinating mechanism. By trapping the conflict in this neural loop, the brain is intentionally halting the physical degradation of the organs associated with those shocks. It literally shifts the damage away from physical illness and pushes the whole response completely into behavioral modification.
The result is a supersized biological response. First off, standard behavior is overridden. The brain literally just suspends normal grief or separation trauma because, biologically speaking, there is zero time to mourn when the lineage is at risk. Second, it induces hyper-mating readiness. The entire biological focus shifts to rapidly replacing that lost mate or securing a new protector for the territory. The evolutionary purpose here is purely practical: ensure the pack continues no matter what.
But does this look the same in everyone? Not at all. That brings us to Section 4, Manic versus Depressive Dominance.
What's truly fascinating here is that the outward behavior isn't just static, it fluctuates. The framework maps this on a scale, kind of like a literal balancing scale inside the brain. The behavior seamlessly shifts depending on which conflict carries a greater biological mass. So if the sexual conflict on the left temporal lobe is heavier, the person is pushed into active, manic states. But if the territorial separation conflict on the right side carries more weight, it pushes them into passive, depressed states.
Looking at this comparison, the biological logic behind both sides becomes super clear. For the manic-dominant person, the core expression is active seduction. They are intensely driven to initiate contact.
Basically, their internal biological logic is shouting, I must actively replace the lost mate to secure the nest. On the flip side, the depressive dominant individual expresses passive attraction. They might look withdrawn or depressed on the outside, but subconsciously they are signaling mating readiness. Their internal logic is saying, I'm depleted, but I have to remain an attractive option so someone will rescue the nest. They both survival strategies, they're just executed in totally different ways.
So what exactly dictates which way this scale tips? Let's find out in Section 5, Controlling the Biological Switches. According to the framework, the precise tilt of that scale is locked and unlocked by two very specific biological switches: hormone status, specifically estrogen levels, and biological handedness, or laterality. Normal estrogen processes conflicts in a feminine orientation on the left hemisphere. But if those estrogen levels drop, the perception flips to process territorial conflicts in a masculine orientation on the right. At the exact same time, a person's biological handedness determines which hemisphere receives that very first shock. These physical realities act just like locks and keys, constantly shifting the balance of the constellation, and as a result, changing the outward behavior.
And that brings us to the final phase of our flowchart. Section 6, Resolving the Nest Crisis. How exactly does this all end?
Under the GNM model, getting back to normal is a strict three-step process. First up is conflict resolution. Now, this isn't just talking it out. It requires the actual psychological and practical resolution of at least one of those two underlying shocks. Once that happens, step 2 kicks in, breaking the constellation. The brain enters a physical healing phase, complete with physical swelling in that specific relay, which actually mechanically breaks that dual hemisphere lock. And finally, step 3, behavioral clearing. The heavy biological imperative completely drops, and those manic or depressive hypermating symptoms just vanish. The emergency protocol is officially over.
I'm going to leave you with this really provocative thought to chew on. If this framework holds true, the Nympho Constellation isn't a permanent identity at all. It's just a highly intelligent, temporary biological program. So it begs the question, how much of our behavior is truly our personality, and how much is just evolution stepping in to save the day? It fundamentally changes how we view mental distress. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning, keep analyzing, and I'll catch you next time.